Um, if you send me the correct details, I will then join according to that. Hello, ma'am, sir.
I am here. I'm here. I was just
Yeah.
waiting if there is any answer from the other side, because MEG-8 is going to finish by 30th of this month. So yeah, so we had 8 days back to back. So this is going to finish on 30th,
What is
and
next? Any idea?
I have because I was assigned only with MEG-8, and only the
Oh,
person,
okay,
yeah,
okay.
only the coordinator can help you out with that.
One sec, ma'am. I'll go back to my mail and check again. Yeah.
Yeah, please. Good evening, Yukti. Yukti, can you just quickly tell me what is that message which comes up the moment you join?
Ma'am, I had checked my mail, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
It says from 21st August till 30th August, it is MEG-5.
Ma'am, you're talking about the mail that you have received in the month of May, isn't it?
After that, I didn't receive any mail. That is
Yes.
what.
So the updated one is probably not shared with you. That's what I had been telling, and
So
I
what
am
should
not.
I do, ma'am? What should I
Ma'am,
do
you
then?
just have to talk to the coordinator of this entire thing. I think you should
Oh,
have by now ignore
uh,
Bhuvneshwar, ignore coordinator. You just have to mention him, or you. I just had also remember that you have to write a mail to him, because I am assigned with a particular subject. So
yeah. Any idea what mail ID it is?
the same mail ID you can refer to from where you have received the mail.
Okay. I'll just reply to them. I don't know whether it will reach. I'm not sure, ma'am. Whether
Also,
the
I request the
Mm,
person here in the other window, classroom
yeah.
2 RC
Mm,
Bhuvneshwar. I request the
yeah.
person there if they can guide the candidates, because everybody is worried because of their mail ID
Yeah.
not being. So I request classroom 2 RC Bhuvneshwar, if you are listening to us, if you're there, please guide the students and please avail them with the email or the updated one, so that they get the right information.
Yeah. So that we don't miss our classes. I'm not sure whether any Google Meet is happening where we are missing the classes. Any other link is being sent. I don't
No,
know
this is the
because
only
I'm
link. This is the only link. This is
okay.
what I know. I can tell
Yeah.
you that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Post 30th, there would be another set of subjects.
Okay.
I'm not sure about what subjects. So between
Okay.
that, you have to take care of it.
So you're sure at the same time there's no other meet going on,
There
no?
is
For
no there
any
is no
other.
other link. This is what I know.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
First.
Okay.
Fine, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank.
Annie. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's begin. We are late by 8 minutes. I'm so sorry for that. Rachel, good evening. Yukti, good evening.
Good evening, ma'am.
Uh, okay. So, Yukti, before we begin, would you like to speak a bit about what is this AI note taking? This might help other students also. You may speak, Yukti, if you want to. Okay, you attend the class from your office. Okay, we get it. Okay. Okay. Meanwhile, Yukti is typing. We move ahead with today's class. So yesterday we had um a house for Mr. Vishwas. That is what we ended up with. Today we begin with Caribbean Poetry by Derek Walcott and Edward Brathwaite. So this is going to be a lengthy one, but I'm sure I'm going to finish this between the time given to us. So here there are two poets, Derek Walcott and Edward Brathwaite. Edward Kamau Brathwaite is his full name, and we are going to pick few poetries written by them. So let's first understand who are who were Derek Walcott and Edward Kamau Brathwaite. So okay, I'll quickly read what Yukti has mentioned. Taking notes or pointers during a class, we might miss something, so it recalls the captions that we can later review, and nothing is missed out. Okay, got it. Yukti, thank you so much. Yukti, you may mute if that's fine for you. Thank you so much. Let's begin. So Derek Walcott and Edward Kamau Brathwaite are prominent Caribbean poets who have made significant contributions to literature, particularly in exploring themes of identity, post colonialism, and the Caribbean experience. So, like I mentioned, we are going to pick few poems. Uh, because of the time constraint, we are going to pick few poems from Derek Walcott and few from Edward Brathwaite, the best poems that they have written, for which reason they are widely acknowledged. And we will try to do an analysis of their feelings, the reason, the intent behind the write ups, and then we will end it up. We first start with Derek Walcott. A bit of in the introduction part, we talked about Derek Walcott, so I'll mention it again here. Derek Walcott was born in 1930. He passed away in 2017. He was a Nobel laureate in literature. In 1992, he was awarded the Nobel laureate in literature. He was from Saint Lucia and is known for his rich poetic style that blends Caribbean dialect with English verbs forms. His works often explore themes of cultural identity, colonialism, and the complexities of Caribbean history and society. He grew up in a multicultural environment, which heavily influenced his later work. His mother, Alex Marlene Walcott, was a teacher who instilled in him a love for literature, while his father, Warwick Walcott, was a civil servant and a talented watercolorist who died when Derek was only 1 year old. This early exposure to both the arts and literature shaped Walcott's creative trajectory. Walcott published his first poem at the age of 14 and his first collection, 25 poems, when he was just 18 years old. This marked the beginning of a prolific career that would span several decades and make him one of the most significant literary figures of the 20th century. In 1959, Walcott founded the Trinidad Theatre Workshop in Port of Spain, Trinidad, which became a significant cultural institution in the Caribbean. Through the workshop, he produced plays that often explored themes of identity, colonialism, and the Caribbean experience. His major works included poetries, plays, essays, and criticisms. Some of his most notable works include The Omeros, written in 1990, The Fortunate Traveler in 81, Dream on a Monkey Mountain, it was written in 1970. He also was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature, a recognition of his vast contribution to world literature. The Nobel Committee praised his work for his historical vision, the outcome of a multicultural commitment, and its ability to give voice to the voiceless. Now, major poetry collections that Walcott had written are In a Green Night. This is a collection of poems. Castaway and Other Poems, Gulf and Other Poems, Another Life. These are all series of poetry collections. And individual notable poems are A Far Cry from Africa, and this one from In a Green Night, and Love After Love, The Sea is History, The Schooner Flight, Omeros, Midsummer Tobacco. These are all from the best of his collections, and these are all individual notable poems from his collections. So today we are going to focus on two poems because, like I mentioned, because of time constraint, we will not be able to focus on everything. But I picked the best of his notable poems that actually explored the identity between African heritage and colonial ties, and also which is applicable to the subject. So we pick one poem first, A Far Cry from Africa. So what we'll do is I'll tell you, first I'll read out the poetry, and line by line, word by word, phrase by phrase, we try to understand what is Walcott's purpose of writing, or what is his motive, what does he want to express, what are the themes connected, what does he really wants to convey to the readers. So let's begin. So this is an overview, The Far Cry from Africa. The poem starts. A wind is ruffling the tawny pelt of Africa. Kikuyu, quick as flies. So I interrupt here for a while. You'll come across some of the words which are clearly the African origin, and mostly if you may not find that clearly in the English terms. So I will be telling you what exactly are they, so you'll get an idea. So let's begin. A wind is ruffling the tawny pelt of Africa. Kikuyu, quick as flies, batten upon the bloodstreams of the veldt. Corpses are scattered through a paradise. Only the worn colonel of carrion cries, waste no compassion on the separate dead. Statistics justify and scholars seize the salience of colonial policy. What is that to the white child hacked in bed to savages expendable as Jews? This is the first paragraph. Let's read the lines again. A wind is ruffling the tawny pelt of Africa. What does Walcott really wants to convey here? He uses a vivid imagery of his personification, and he is personifying Africa as an animal, evoking a sense of the continent's natural beauty and wildness. The wind ruffling this pelt suggests disturbance, turmoil, or change, which could symbolize the upheaval caused by colonialism and the violence erupting across the continent. Kikuyu, quick as flies, batten upon the bloodstreams of the veldt. The Kikuyu is a Kenyan ethnic group involved in the Mau Mau uprising and are compared to flies feeding on blood. The simile presents a disturbing image, implying that the violence is pervasive and parasitic, drawing attention to the bloodshed and the voracious nature of the conflict. The bloodstreams of the Welt highlights the savagery of the scene, with the African landscape itself being soaked in blood. Corpses are scattered through a paradise. Now, how can the same sentence carry corpse, and how can there be paradise there? So, what does it signify? This line juxtaposes the natural beauty of Africa, that once upon a time was termed as paradise, with the horror of death and destructions. This is what corpse symbolizes here. So, right now, the poet tells that once paradise, right now, there is a horror of death, and corpses are scattered everywhere throughout the paradise. The image of a paradise littered with corpses speaks about the tragic consequences of violence and the profound dissonance between the idealized image of Africa and its brutal reality. Only the warm colonel of carrion cries, waste no compassion on these sacred dead. The worm here is again personified as colonel of carrion, a leader of decay who dismisses the individual value of the dead. This metaphor suggests the inevitability of decay and the indifferent, perhaps even cynical, attitude towards the victims of violence. The command to waste no compassion implies a dehumanizing perspective where individuals' lives are individual are reduced to mere statistics, just numbers. How many of them are dead? The corpses are counted, reduced to just mere statistics. Critic of colonialism. Here, this is what the imagery or the message that Walcott wants to create upon. Statistics justify and scholars seize the salience of colonial policy. Here, Walcott critiques the cold, rational justifications used by the colonial powers to legitimize their actions. Statistics represent the dehumanizing quantification of violence, where scholars seizing salience of policy suggest the intellectualization and strategic planning of colonial dominance. The language here implies that colonial policies are detached from the human suffering that they have caused. Moral ambiguity, there is a sense of moral ambiguity, there is a consequence of violence that is clearly seen in the lines. What is that to the white child hacked in bed, to savages expendable as Jews? This line represents a stark image of a white child hacked in bed, bringing the horror of violence into sharp focus. The phrase savages expendable as Jews is deeply provocative, linking the dehumanization of African rebels to the atrocities of the Holocaust. Walcott is drawing a parallel between different forms of systemic violence, highlighting the moral ambiguity and the ease with which certain lives are deemed expendable. The tone here in the first paragraph is dark and very disturbing, accusatory. Walcott here uses stark imagery and contrasts to create a sense of horror and moral outrage. The mood is tense and it's setting the stage for the exploration of the complex, painful issues that the poem grapples with. Some of the themes that are introduced in this paragraph are the imagery of blood, corpse, and they immediately introduce the theme of violence, specifically the brutal consequences of colonialism in Africa. The poem does not present clear heroes or villains, but instead highlights the moral complexity of the situation where both sides of the conflict are implicated in violence. The juxtaposition of paradise with corpse and the reference to white and savages sets out the tension between different cultural identities and the impact of colonialism on these identities. Moving to the next stanza, the second one. Threshed out by beaters, the long rushes break in a white dust of ibises whose cries have wheeled since civilization's dawn from the parched river or beast teeming plain. The violence of beast on beast is read as natural law, but upright man seeks his divinity by inflicting pain. Delirious as these worried beasts, his wars dance to the tightened carcass of a drum, while he calls courage still that native dread of the white peace contracted by the dead. I'll repeat. Threshed out by beaters, the long rushes break. Now, this image evokes a sense of a hunt where beaters drive out game from tall grasses or rushes, symbolizing how colonial forces disrupt the natural environment and social order of Africa. The long rushes breaking under the pressure of the hunt could symbolize the breakdown of traditional African societies under the strain of colonialism. In a white dust of ibises whose cries have wheeled since civilization's dawn, the white dust stirred up by the ibis, a bird often associated with wisdom and knowledge. Look at the imagery that Walcott is producing here. A bird often associated with wisdom and knowledge in various cultures can be seen as a symbol of the enduring presence of nature and history in Africa, long before and despite the impact of colonialism. The ibis cries are a reminder of a timeless natural order contrasting with the violence brought by human civilization. From the parched river or beast teeming plain, this imagery highlights the harsh yet vibrant African landscape, suggesting both the resilience and the suffering of the continent under colonial exploitation. The parched river signifies drought and deprivation, while the beast teeming plain hints at the untamed, abundant life that exists in Africa, often disrupted by external forces. The violence of beast on beast is read as natural law. Here, focus on the use of word beast twice, but two different prepositions. The violence of beast on beast. Here, Walcott contrasts natural violence in the animal kingdom with the calculated, deliberate violence of humans. In the natural world, violence is seen as a necessary part of survival and the natural order. So that is where we focus on the word natural law here. But human violence, especially in the context of war and colonialism, is portrayed as something that seeks to elevate man above nature, though in a destructive and morally ambiguous way. But upright man seeks his divinity by inflicting pain. This line is a powerful critique of human arrogance. Unlike animals, humans inflict pain not out of necessity but as a means of asserting power and control, often under the guise of higher ideals or divine purposes. The phrase seeks his divinity suggests a perverse attempt to play God, to control and dominate rather than to coexist with the natural world. The irony of human courage here in the next line is clearly mentioned like delirious as these worried beasts, his wars, dance to the tightened carcass of a drum. The comparison of humans to delirious beasts highlights the irrationality and madness of war. The phrase tightened carcass of a drum is particularly striking because it suggests that human wars are conducted to the rhythm of death, with drums traditionally made from animal skins, now symbolizing the dead bodies that war produces. This imagery portrays war as a macabre, frenzied dance driven by madness and destruction, while he calls courage still that native dread of the white peace contracted by the dead. This line is deeply ironic. The courage referenced here is not true bravery but a misguided valor rooted in fear. That is where the term native dread comes in. And the hollow peace imposed by colonial powers, that is mentioned as the white peace. The white peace is peace enforced by the colonialists, often at the cost of countless lives contracted by the dead. The term white also alludes to the racial undertones of colonialism, where peace is maintained through violence and subjugation rather than mutual understanding or justice. Now, if you focus on the tone of this stanza, it's one of the bitter irony and sorrow. Walcott critiques the supposed civilization brought by colonial powers, revealing it to be a facade for brutality and exploitation. The theme of the stanza centers on the contrast between natural violence and the destructive, self righteous violence of human beings, particularly in the context of colonialism and war. This distinction underscores the hypocrisy of colonial powers who justify their actions through notions of superiority and divine right, while in reality, their actions bring devastation and death. End of second paragraph. Second paragraph here delves into the moral and philosophical conflicts surrounding colonialism and violence. There is vivid imagery, ionic tone, and critical reflection on the nature of human violence. Walcott exposes the contradictions and cruelties inherent in colonial domination. The paragraph serves as a poignant commentary on the impact of colonialism on Africa, questioning the very foundations of so called civilization and courage. Going to the third paragraph. Again, brutish necessity wipes its hands upon the napkin of a dirty cause, again, a waste of our compassion, as with Spain. The gorilla wrestles with the Superman. I, who am poisoned with the blood of both, where shall I turn, divided to the vein? I, who have cursed the drunken officer of British rule, how choose between this Africa and the English tongue I love? Betray them both or give back what they give? How can I face such slaughter and be cool? How can I turn from Africa and live? This is the third paragraph of Walcott's A Far Cry from Africa, and it is profound reflection on the poet's inner turmoil and the broader implications of colonialism. It captures the complex emotions and the ambiguities that arise from being of a mixed heritage and the tension between loyalty to one's ancestry and the cultural influences that shapes today's one's identity. Again, British necessity wipes its hands upon the napkin of a dirty cause. So, the phrase British necessity here suggests that violence and cruelty are often seen as unavoidable and necessary evils in the context of colonial conflicts. Wipes its hands upon the napkin of a dirty cause implies that this brutality is being justified or sanitized by those who perpetuate it, even though the cause itself is morally tainted. The imagery of wiping hands clean on a napkin evokes the idea of guilt being dismissed or cleansed through its although it's inherently dirty. The reference to Spain, like as with Spain, the reference to Spain likes to mostly likely to talk about the Spanish Civil War, a conflict marked by extreme violence and the involvement of foreign powers. By drawing this parallel, Walcott underscores the recurring nature of such conflicts and the ways in which they drain someone's compassion. The idea of compassion being wasted suggests a sense of futility in trying to emphasize the empathy with or resolve these violent cyclical struggles. The gorilla wrestles with the Superman. This line is rich with symbolic meaning. The gorilla represents the African resistance fighters, often dehumanized and viewed as savages by colonial powers, while the Superman evokes the image of the colonizers, possibly referencing the concept of superior race. The wrestle between these two figures encapsulates the brutal, ongoing struggle between the colonized and the colonizers. The use of gorilla also carries connotations of primitivism and dehumanization, while Superman suggests an inflated, perhaps even delusional, sense of superiority on the part of the colonizers. I, who am poisoned with the blood of both, where shall I turn, divided to the vein? Now, here Walcott expresses his mixed heritage and identity crisis, his deep internal conflict, through the metaphor of being poisoned with the blood of both. This suggests that his mixed African and European heritage feels like a curse or a source of pain rather than a blessing. The phrase divided into the vein indicates that this conflict runs deep within him, down to his very essence, affecting his sense of self and belonging. Where shall I turn? Now, this is a rhetorical question that highlights Walcott's feeling of being trapped between the two worlds, completely different to each other, unable to fully embrace either side of his heritage without feeling a sense of betrayal. It's almost impossible. It conveys his profound sense of disorientation and the confusion in trying to navigate these conflicting identities. I, who have cursed the drunken officer of British rule, how choose between this Africa and the English tongue I love, betray them both, or give back what they give? Now, what does Walcott mean by the drunken officer of British rule? This line reflects Walcott's condemnation of British colonialism, symbolized by the figure of a drunken officer, a representation of the corrupt, oppressive nature of colonial authority. His act of cursing his figure indicates his rejection of the injustices and the brutalities of colonial rule. The conflict of loyalties here is the central dilemma that this stanza presents. The choice between this Africa and the English tongue I love. Here, Walcott is torn between his African roots with their cultural and historical significance and his love for the English language, which is a product of the very colonial system he despises. This conflict represents a broader struggle faced by many in post colonial societies. The challenge of reconciling a colonial past with a desire for self determination and cultural integrity. Betray them both or give back what they give. The poet here grapples with the idea of betrayal. If he chooses one side, he feels he will betray the other. The phrase give back what they give suggests a reciprocal relationship, but also hints at the difficulty of repaying these conflicting cultural inheritances. The choice between betraying both heritages or trying to give back in equal measure underscores the poet's profound sense of moral and emotional conflict. How can I face such slaughter and be cool? How can I turn from Africa and live? Now we see there is an, an emotional and a moral turmoil inside the, the speaker. These are the final rhetorical questions, and they highlight the impossibility of remaining detached or indifferent. That's where the word cool means. In the face of such a horrific violence and suffering in Africa, Walcott acknowledges the emotional weight of the situation, emphasizing that turning away from Africa would be a kind of spiritual or cultural death for him. The, if you notice, how can I has been repeated twice. How can I face such slaughter and be cool? How can I turn from Africa and live? So, this repetition of how can I emphasizes his deep seated anguish and inability to reconcile his feelings. The poet's existential struggle here is laid bare in these lines clearly. He feels that turning away from Africa would not only be a betrayal, but would also render his life meaningless. That is his ancestry. This expresses the profound connection he feels to his African heritage despite the pain and conflict it causes to him. Now, in this stanza, uh, we see Derek Walcott internal conflict. As a person of mixed heritage, he is struggling with the legacies of colonialism and the violence it has wrought. Through vivid imagery, historical allusion, and intense rhetorical questioning, the poet here explores the painful ambiguities of identity, loyalty, and moral responsibility. Overall, the poem reflects the broader themes about the tragic and the unresolved nature of the poet's quest for belonging in a world divided by history and power. We end with the first poem here of Derek Walcott, A Far Cry from Africa, which has violence, which has the irony of human courage, which has a tone and a theme of sorrow and bitterness, which has vivid imagery, which has the nature of violence, human violence, which talks about being from the mixed heritage, the tension between loyalty to choose one's original heritage and the current one which shapes one's identity. The explore the exploration of the poet here clearly suggests the kind of moral ambiguity he is into, which is really painful for him. So he cannot decide upon who he should choose. The poet ends with the rhetorical question, and it is open to the reader of to them to think what might be the answer to it. Now, if I may ask this question to all of you, can somebody of you say what ought to be the answer? Who should he actually belong to? Does he really belong to the ancestry now, or does he really belong to the English language that he is loving it? What are your views? If you were into that situation, what would you choose? One that is your the root, or the one that is shaping your identity gradually? You may type down. Meanwhile, when we get back to the message section again, I will take you all to the next poem of Derek Walcott, and this one is Love After Love. So, Love After Love is a poem by Derek Walcott where he celebrates self discovery and self love. The poem, published in his collection Sea Grapes in 1976, is often regarded as a meditation on personal healing and the journey towards self acceptance. Walcott's Caribbean heritage, his experiences with post colonial identity, and his reflections on the complexities of human relationships influence the tone and the overall theme of the poem. As mentioned, he is celebrating self discovery and self love. It's more about personal healing and his journey towards self acceptance, which we will find as the broader theme of this poem, Love After Love. The poem encourages the reader to embrace themselves fully, recognizing that self love is essential and after the end of a relationship or a period of self alienation. It suggests that one must learn to find joy and fulfillment within oneself rather than seeking validation solely from others. So, can we begin with this poem? Meanwhile, I'll get back to the message. No, no answer yet. Okay, what are your ideas regarding self love? What are your views regarding self love? How many of you practice self love? Okay, let's understand. Let's read the poem first. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror. and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, "Sit here, eat." You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life. Now, in 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 the first stanza, this is the entire poem. We'll go by the first stanza. In the first stanza that begins with the phrase, "The time will come," which suggests a future moment of transformation or realization. It introduces the idea that there is a specific point in the future where one will experience a profound and joyful reunion with oneself. This foreshadows the poem's overarching theme, the journey towards self discovery after a period of self alienation or emotional hardship. The word elation conveys a sense of intense happiness or joy, implying that this moment of self recognition will be a profoundly positive and uplifting experience. Walcott is suggesting that the act of reconnecting with oneself is not just a neutral event but a celebratory one filled with emotional fulfillment and satisfaction. The imagery of greet yourself, arriving at your own door in your own mirror, is rich in symbolism. The act of greeting oneself at the door represents a metaphorical homecoming, returning to one's true self after being away or lost. The door symbolizes the boundary between the external world and the inner self, and by arriving at it, the person is coming back to a place of self acceptance and love. The mirror is a classic symbol of self reflection and truth. In this context, it suggests that the person will finally see themselves clearly, recognizing their true identity and worth. The reflection in the mirror is not just a physical image, but a deeper recognition of the self that may have been obscured or ignored in the past. The line, "and each will smile at the other's welcome," implies a dual recognition, both the person and the reflection or their true self acknowledge each other with warmth and acceptance. This mutual recognition suggests a reconciliation between different aspects of the self that may have been in conflict or estranged. The smile symbolizes a peaceful and affectionate reunion, indicating that the process of self discovery is not only about finding oneself but also about embracing and welcoming oneself with kindness and understanding. The tone of this stanza is one of assurance and positivity. Walcott's use of future tense, "the time will come," gives the reader a sense of inevitability, as if this moment of self discovery is something that everyone will eventually experience. The language is gentle here, and there is a sense of reassurance, encouraging the reader to look forward to this moment with anticipation and confidence. Stanza 2. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another who knows you by heart. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. This line tells the central theme of self discovery. The phrase, the stranger who was yourself, reflects the idea that the speaker or reader has become estranged from their own identity. Over time, whether due to relationships, societal expectations, or self neglect, one may lose touch with their authentic self, becoming a stranger even to themselves. The use of again implies that this love for oneself is something that can be rekindled, suggesting that self love is innate but can be forgotten or foreshadowed sometimes. Give wine, give bread. This line introduces a ritualistic element to the poem, reminiscent of a communion or sacred meal. Wine and bread are the traditional symbols of nourishment and sustenance. But in this context, they symbolize the act of nurturing and celebrating oneself. The imperative give emphasizes the need for self care and indulgence, treating oneself with the same kindness and generosity that one might extend to others. Give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life. The idea of giving back one's heart to itself suggests a return to wholeness, the heart often associated with love and emotional life is here depicted as something that can be reclaimed. The stranger who has loved you all your life is the true self, the core of one's being, which has always been present but may have been ignored or suppressed. This line speaks of the endurance of self love, even when forgotten. It remains a fundamental part of who you are, whom you ignored for another who knows you by heart. The reason for the estrangement mentioned earlier, these lines reveal that the another likely refers to the external relationships, the societal roles, or the pursuit of validation from others sometimes, which have caused the individual to neglect their own needs and identity. The phrase ignored for another implies a choice or sacrifice made in the past, whereas one's true self was set aside in favor of someone or something. Now, this stanza concludes with the reminder that this stranger, that is a true self, knows you by heart. This clearly indicates a deep, inherent understanding and connection that exists within oneself, highlighting the idea that despite the neglect, one's true self remains a constant, reliable presence. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes, peel your own image from the mirror, sit, feast on your life. Love letters, photographs, desperate notes, they are all symbolizing the past relationships and emotional baggage. By advising the reader here to take down these items, Walcott suggests a need to confront and process these memories rather than leaving them as untouched artifacts. The bookshelf represents the storage of past experiences and emotions, which, though once important, should now be revisited in order to move forward. Peel your own image from the mirror. This image of peeling one's own image from the mirror is particularly striking. It suggests the act of detachment from one's superficial self perceptions or the roles one has played in the past. The mirror here symbolizes self reflection and perhaps self awareness too. And peeling away one's image implies a deeper, more authentic self beneath the surface. Sit, feast on your life. This is what is like a command to sit, feast on your life. It combines the idea of rest, contemplation, and indulgence. Feast here connotes a celebration or appreciation of something precious. Here it implies that the life one has lived, with all its experiences and lessons, is worth savoring. This is a call to embrace and enjoy one's existence in a mindful and appreciative manner. So, if we focus on the style of writing, we read two poems. This is the end of the second poem, Love After Love, which talks about the central themes of self reconciliation, self acceptance. Language is direct, provides a powerful message from the importance of confronting and appreciating one's own life. If you focus on the style of writing, Derek Walcott's style of writing is marked by its rich complexity, lush imagery. There are influences, diverse influences, profound engagement with the themes of history, cultural memory. His poetry is renowned for his technical mastery and emotional depths, reflecting his Caribbean heritage. So, here we stop with the first poet, Derek Walcott's. We could finish two poems. We'll take a break now, a tea break, and we'll come back with the next poet, Edward Brathwaite. So we'll take two poems, we'll choose two poems, and we'll do a critical analysis of it. So see you after the break. It can take 10 minutes time. The subject is MEG-8. Can we begin? Let's begin with the second poet, Edward Brathwaite. This is the second poet that we are going to focus on. We will pick two poetries from his collections. We will focus on the critical analysis, the themes, and towards the end, we do a comparative study between both the poets. So this is Edward Brathwaite, born 1930, died 2002. He was a prominent Barbadian poet, historian, and academic whose work is highly regarded for his innovative use of language and exploration of Caribbean identity and history. His literary career and background reflect a deep engagement with both the cultural and historical dimensions of the Caribbean experience. So, Prathvit family, his father was a merchant, his mother was a teacher. They tried their best to provide him with a background that valued education and cultural engagement. Prathvit attended the University of Cambridge in the UK, where he studied history. His major works are Rites of Passage, written in 1967, Moses, Man of the Mountain, 1990, Cain, A New World Trilogy, 1919, and important poems of Edward Brathwaite is The Wanderer, Calypso, A Long Play, Barbados Islands. We focus today from his poems collections, and the poem is Islands, written in 1969. Let's begin. So, looking through a map of the islands, you see rocks, histories, hot lies rotting, hulls, cannon wheels, the sun's slum. If you hate us, jewels, if there is delight in your eyes, the light shimmers on water, the cunning coral keeps it blue. The imagery and symbolism in this particular poem, rock that symbolizes the island's physical and metaphorical harshness and their unyielding nature under historical and environmental pressures. Rotting hulls here refers to the remnants of colonial ships, which symbolizes the decay of the colonial past and the forgotten aspects of history. This image evokes the sense of neglect and exploitation that the islands have endured. History's Hot Lies talks about the historical narratives surrounding the islands, which are not only misleading but also actively damaging. The word hot here implies that these lies are still burning with the intensity of their impact, affecting current perceptions and realities. The use of the phrase cannon wheels is a direct reference to the colonial and the military history of the islands, evoking images of conflict and oppression. They serve as symbols of the colonial forces that shaped the island's past. Sun's slums. This term juxtaposes the beauty associated with the sun, often a symbol of vitality and warmth, with the notion of slums, suggesting that beneath the attractive exterior lies a reality of squalor and neglect. It criticizes the romanticization of the islands, revealing the underlying socioeconomic struggles. Jewels and shimmers. Jewels here suggest the view of the islands as precious and valuable. This contrasts sharply with the earlier imagery of decay and exploitation. The shimmer of the light on water and the cunning coral that keeps its blue are images of surface beauty and deceptive allure. Looking at the tone and the perspective here, we see Brathwaite highlights the disparity between how the islands might be perceived romantically, like that of jewels, and their harsh realities underneath, like rocks and rotting hulls. The poet here uses the tone, which is critical and at the same time ionic. The poet's use of irony emphasizes the gap between the perception and reality. The stanza here conveys a duality in the perception of the islands. It acknowledges the island's superficial beauty and potential delight, which is the term jewels connotation, but simultaneously critiques the way this beauty masks the island's historical and social issues. This ambivalence reflects the complexity of the Caribbean experience. Stanza critiques the colonial legacy that has left physical and metaphorical scars on the islands. The remnants of cannon wheels and rotting hulls symbolize the enduring impact of colonial exploitation and conflict. Brathwaite contrasts the romanticized view of the islands with their actual socioeconomic conditions. The shimmering water and cunning coral represent how beauty can obscure deeper truths, suggesting that the island's real issues are often hidden behind their picturesque facade. Brathwaite's language here is concise, impactful, using vivid imagery and stark contrasts to convey his message. The strong visual and sensory imagery to highlight the disparity between the island's outward and the inner reality is clearly employed here. This approach engages the reader's senses and enhances the critical tone of the poem. Looking through a map, now this is the second stanza, taking you ahead. Looking through a map of the entails, you see how time has trapped its humble servants here. Descendants of the slave do not lie in the lap of the more fortunate gods. The rat in the warehouse is as much king as the sugar he plunders. But if your eyes are kinder, you will observe butterflies, how they fly higher and higher before their hope dries with endeavor and they fall among flies. The imagery of the time, that is trapping, the word trapping the islands inhabitants suggest a sense of historical entrapment and stagnation. This metaphor indicates that the descendants of enslaved people are caught in a cycle of poverty and exploitation, unable to escape the legacies of their past. The humble servants refer to the Caribbean people, while the more fortunate gods symbolize those in positions of power and privilege. This contrast highlights the disparity between the oppressed and the elite, suggesting that the descendants of slaves are far from the comfort and privilege enjoyed by the powerful. The rat in the warehouse symbolizes the marginalized and exploited people. It represents survival amidst scarcity and the economic exploitation of the Caribbean people. The sugar, which is the rat plundering, is a symbol of wealth and the colonial exploitation. The comparison emphasizes how the marginalized are forced to contend with the remnants of an exploitative system. Butterflies here represent hope and aspiration as they symbolize beauty and the potential for transcendence. Their flight higher and higher suggests the struggle for improvement and progress. However, the imagery of butterflies falling among the flies conveys the disappointment and disillusionment when hope falters and aspirations are dashed by harsh realities. The tone here in the stanza is melancholic, it is reflective, it is addressing the hardships, the continued hardships, and the limited progress of the Caribbean people. There is a sense of resigned acceptance of the difficulties faced by the descendants of enslaved individuals. Brathwaite here provides a critical perspective on the disparity between the aspirational hopes of the Caribbean people and the ongoing socioeconomic challenges. The poet focuses on the struggle for progress amidst oppressive conditions, highlighting the enduring impact of historical injustices. The language here is quite simple. He uses the juxtaposition to create a stark contrast between hope and despair, privilege and exploitation. There is a use of contrasting images like rat and the butterfly against the backdrop of historical and socio-economic struggles that enhances the critical tone of the poem. Taking you to the third paragraph. Looking through a map of the islands, you see that the history teaches that when hope splinters, when the pieces of broken glass lie in the sunlight, when only lust rules the night, when the dust is not swept out of the houses, when men make noises louder than the sea's voices, then the rope will never unravel its knots. The branding iron's traveling flame that teaches us pain will never be extinguished. The island's jewels, Sabah, Barbuda, dry flattened Antigua, will remain rocks, dots in the sky blue frame of the map. Now, the broken glass symbolizes the fragmentation of hope and the disillusionment of Caribbean people. The imagery of broken glass lying under the sunlight evokes a sense of lost potential and the harsh reality of unfulfilled promises. Lust represents the moral decay and corruption that permeates the night, contrasting with ideal of hope, dust that remains unchecked signifies neglect and the accumulation of problems that are not addressed or cleaned away. The loud noises made by men are depicted as overpowering and distracting compared to the sea's voices. This contrast highlights the dissonance between human echoes and the natural voice enduring presence of the sea which symbolizes the unchanging and constant truths of history and nature. Rope and branding iron are potential symbol of suffering and oppression. The rope represents the entanglement of historical injustices that are difficult to untangle, while the branding iron signifies the lasting scars of colonialism and exploitation. The traveling flame here in this stanza suggests the ongoing and the spreading impact of this pain. It's never ending, it's traveling. The stanza reflects on the persistence of historical injustices and the continuing struggles faced by the Caribbean islands. The phrase hope splinters and that issues like lust and dust remain unaddressed. Braithwaite here critiques the tendency to overlook or forget the deep seated issues that continue to affect the islands. Imagery of broken glass in the sunlight serves as a metaphor for the visible but ignored suffering. The tone of the stanza is somber and reflective, with an emphasis on the endurance or the enduring nature of pain and the persistence of historical trauma. There is a sense of resignation and disillusionment in the depiction of the islands. The use of imagery like rocks, dots suggest a pessimistic view of the island's future, constrained by their unresolved past. Language here used is powerful, evocative. Brathwaite has used concrete imagery to convey abstract concepts such as hope, suffering, loud noises, sea voices. Such kind of phrases used underscores the contrast between the natural order and the human chaos. Overall, the stanza uses complex imagery and symbolism, which adds depth to the analysis of the island situation. So, Brathwaite very vividly using the visual elements creates a layer and a nuanced portrayal of Caribbean history and identity in the poem Islands. So we are done with Islands. This is one of the best poems of Brathwaite. And now we move to the next poem of Brathwaite. This is Shar, the hurricane poem. Let's first read out the poem, then we do the critical analysis of it. For the stone of this island to be bombed by this wind and all this water, O longshore, late night, duppy Kingston nights wood has become so useless, stripped wet, fragile, broken, totally uninhabitable, with what we must still build a half a million shaved off from the auction block, curled and cut off their stalk, without even that sweet scent of rising on a good day. Uh, Now, stone bombed by wind and water. If you do an analysis of the first paragraph of the poem Hurricane, Shar Hurricane, the imagery of stone being bombed by wind and water symbolizes the relentless and the destructive forces of nature impacting the island. It underscores the idea that even the most enduring elements are vulnerable to natural forces. Wood becomes useless and fragile. Here it talks about the useless wood, which reflects the destruction of natural resources and the impact of environmental degradation. The reference to the auction block talks about the historical exploitation and commodification of resources, and people adding a layer of historical context to the poem. The sweet scent of resin evokes a sense of nostalgia for what has been lost or destroyed. Its absence symbolizes the loss of natural beauty and traditional craftsmanship. The mention of auction blocks alludes to the transatlantic slave trade and the exploitation of Caribbean resources and people. This historical reference frames the poem within a context of colonial and post colonial struggle. The invocation of longshore, late light, duppy Kingston nights suggests a connection to the Caribbean folklore and cultural memory, highlighting the impact of historical and environmental forces on cultural practices. The tone is one of despair and loss, kind of a tone, as the poet reflects on the devastation wrought by natural forces and historical exploitation. You'll find the word wasted repeated thrice, emphasizing the depth of this despair. The perspective is both reflective and critical, combining observations of contemporary destruction with an acknowledgement of historical injustices. Taking you to the second paragraph. O Savior, Savior, salva mar, wasted, wasted, wasted. All wasted, wasted, wasted. The 500 years of Columbus dragging us here, and the 4,300 years before that, across valley and dune, dry river bed, gully and wadi, slip scream of sandstorm, salt mineral glint quartz, cutting the soles of my feet, gold in the harrowed face of the rock, gold in what will become leaf, branch, eucalyptus, cocoa, pod, odum, twenedru, chiki chiki, even the evening man, grove at Golokwati and Pong, and the spider, Akane, Anase, the sweet of your arms, hollowed out at Anam. The repeated cry to Savior and the repetition of wasted emphasizes the plea for the divine intervention amidst the overwhelming loss. The reference to Columbus and the years before that frames the poem within a historical context of exploitation and colonization. You'll find there is a description of valley and dune, dry riverbed, gully and wadi. They all evoke the natural landscape of the Caribbean, highlighting the harsh environmental conditions faced by the island. There is a mention of gold and the other natural elements that reflect both the richness and the exploitation of land. Odum, Twenedru, Chiki Chiki, and Enase, they tie the poem to Caribbean folklore and cultural heritage, suggesting that these traditions and symbols are intertwined with the island's environmental and historical realities. The stanza critiques the impact of continues to critique the impact of colonial exploitation and the historical trauma inflicted upon the Caribbean islands. The mention of Columbus and the long period before highlights the enduring legacy of his exploitation. The tone is pleading and reflective at the same time, with a strong sense of urgency and desperation. The poet grapples with the historical and the environmental devastation while seeking redemption and renewal. The next paragraph. And that more wind, rip, gust, Caesar's hall, copper kettle boiling, boiling, over into your ears, would wait, wait, wait like a snap or a flat rat trap in the streets to freeze, freeze, frizzle out of your head where you are hoarding its sound. like a timbrel of thunder, such limitless size in the so little a room that you own. The imagery of wind, rip, gust, scissors, howl, they all evoke the violent and the destructive nature of storms, emphasizing the chaotic and controllable aspects of environmental forces. The boiling kettle here talks about the copper kettle boiling, which talks about the intensity and the pressure of the situation, as well as the potential for eruption or overflow of emotions and memories. The metaphor of hoarding sound like a timbre of thunder suggests the overwhelming and uncontainable nature of the experience, emphasizing the struggle to manage or escape from it. The tone conveys a sense of desperation and overwhelm, with the repeated use of weight and the imagery of a snap or flat rat trap, suggesting a feeling of entrapment and helplessness. The perspective reflects on the personal impact of environmental and historical forces, exploring the internal struggle to cope up with and make sense of these overwhelming experiences. Next paragraph. The wood of your veils and the fret work the fancy fence and the humble hallelujah railing of your chapel, all shattering now with that round saw's buzz of teeth that will eat all the leaves of the trees, most of the wood of their treasuries, even the big ones like cotton and cedar and guango, and cut the branches off short to a white stubble and trump, frayed out like the end of a chew stick or bomb ballast. Imagery of shutter and the buzz of teeth convey the violent destruction of the natural and man made elements. This symbolizes the loss of both physical and cultural structures, highlighting the pervasive impact of environmental and historical forces. The image of leaves and branches being cut off reflects the depletion and destruction of natural resources. The use of white stubble and frayed out conveys a sense of irreversible damage and decay. The tone is one of uh, kind of a destructive, capturing the extensive damage inflicted by the forces. Perspective here is critical of the forces responsible for the destruction, whether natural or man made, and reflects the profound impact of this devastation on both the environment and cultural heritage. Focusing on the two poems, Edward Camus Brathwaite's poetic style, we find there is a rich tapestry woven from the threads of Caribbean culture, history, and personal experiences. His work reflects a profound engagement with rhymes, language, and experiences of the Caribbean, and he employs a distinctive style that, of course, captures the complexity of the region's past and present. Brathwaite's poetry is notable for his experimental use of language, his incorporation of Caribbean traditions and themes related to identity, history, and cultural heritage. Focusing on the dialect and the language, you'll find that one of the most striking features of Brathwaite's poetry is the Caribbean dialects. The poetry often incorporating Caribbean Creole languages, which adds a layer of authenticity and cultural specificity to his work. Linguistic choices, uh, capture the true essence of Caribbean life and to honor the traditions and the linguistic heritage of the region. Brathwaite's use of dialect not only grounds his work in a specific cultural context but also challenges the dominance of colonial languages and narratives. So we completed uh, two poems from Derek Walcott, two poems from Edward Kamau Brathwaite. Now let's find out what is the commonness between the two poems, or mostly the style of writing, or what is that common or the similarity between the two poets. Derek Walcott and Edward Brathwaite are non, no doubt two towering figures in the Caribbean literature, distinct in style, thematic focus. They share several commonalities that reflect their engagement with the Caribbean identity, history, and culture. Both poets utilize their work to explore the complex legacies of colonialism, the rich cultural tapestry of the Caribbean, challenges of forging a coherent identity in the aftermath of historical upheaval. The central theme in both Walcott's and Brathwaite's poetry is the Caribbean identity. Both poets grapple with the question of what it means to be Caribbean in a post colonial context. Their work reflects a deep engagement with the Caribbean's complex history and diverse cultural influences. Focusing on, let's say, Derek Walcott, he often uses his poetry to reflect Caribbean's colonial past and the ways in which it has shaped the region's identity. For example, in the poem The Far Cry from Africa, Walcott confronts the legacy of colonialism and the internal conflict it creates within individuals who are caught between different cultural and historical forces. His work frequently addresses the challenges of reconciliation, Caribbean identity with the lingering effects of colonialism, and the complexities of multicultural heritage. On the other hand, uh, Edward Brathwaite uses his poetry to celebrate Caribbean culture, to assert the importance of preserving and reclaiming Caribbean heritage. For example, his poem Islands or Sar Hurricane explores the way history is remembered and recorded, emphasizing the role of Caribbean islands as a symbol of collective memory and cultural heritage. Now, focusing on the language and dialect, you'll find both poets they employ distinctive language and dialects to reflect Caribbean experiences. Walcott's language is marked by its literary sophistication, while Brathwaite's use of language is more overtly experimental. Walcott's engages with multiple linguistic and cultural traditions, while Brathwaite incorporates Caribbean Creole and vernacular language in a way that reflects the rhythms and cadences of Caribbean speech. Both Walcott and Brathwaite they approach not only the vibrancy of the Caribbean life, but also assert the validity of the Caribbean languages that serves to bridge the gap between the colonial past and present. Both poets engage deeply with historical and cultural themes, though they do so in different ways. Walcott reflects on the impact of colonialism and the legacy of slavery. Most of his work frequently address the fragmentation and dislocation caused by historical forces. exploring how these forces shape individual and collective identities. Brathwaite, on the other hand, focus on the ways in which history and cultural heritage intersect in the Caribbean while celebrating the resilience and creativity of Caribbean people. Both poets are known for their innovative approaches to poetic forms, though their experiments manifest again differently. Walcott employs a range of traditional and experimental forms, blending elements of classical poetry, and Brathwaite, in contrast, known for his radical experimentation with form and structure, often conventional Western forms, using unconventional lines, breaks, spacing, punctuation to reflect the oral traditions and cultural rhythms of the Caribbean. Both poets address themes of conflict and resolutions in their work, though their focus and treatment of these themes vary. Walcott explores the internal and the external conflicts arising from the colonial legacy, while Brathwaite tends to focus on the collective struggles and the triumphs of Caribbean societies. Walcott reflects a sense of dislocation and fragmentation, while Brathwaite's poetry often reflects a sense of resilience and empowerment. Both poets are concerned with the role of memory in shaping identity and experiences through their approach, although their approach is different. Walcott often explores personal and collective memory through his engagement with Caribbean history, while Brathwaite places a strong emphasis on collective memory and cultural heritage. Now, if you would want to conclude today's chapter that focused on the Caribbean poems, Caribbean poetry by Derek Walcott and Edward Brathwaite. Derek Walcott and Edward Brathwaite, despite their different styling approaches, share a profound commitment to explore and reflect on Caribbean identity, and history, and culture. The poetry engages the readers with the legacies of colonialism, richness of Caribbean heritage, and the challenges of forging a coherent identity in a post colonial world. Their innovative use of language, experimental forms, and thematic focus. Both poets offer powerful reflections on the Caribbean experiences, contributing to a deeper understanding of the region's complex and multifaceted identity. Their work stands as a testament to the enduring significance of Caribbean culture and the ongoing struggle to reconcile the past with the present. We end here with the Caribbean poetry, Derek Walcott and Edward Brathwaite. Uh, I asked in the very beginning regarding your views about self healing. I asked some questions. So if you can still talk about your views regarding uh, the poems that we discussed today by Derek Walcott and Edward Brathwaite. Let's talk about Love After Love by Derek Walcott. What are your views regarding it? How do you find the writing style, or what do you how do you find the purpose of the writer, the poets, or let's say only specifically Derek Walcott first? Anyone? You can type your answers. Okay, I think um, fine. Then, if you have nothing to answer, then we can wrap up today. We meet tomorrow again with a, uh, new lesson, and it would be an Australian novel, The Solid Mandala by Patrick White. That is what we are going to discuss tomorrow. Fine, then. Thank you so much for today. Yes, Yukti, you're writing something. It resonates very well with individuals to love themselves despite hardships and be positive. Yes. What are your views if I talk about the pain that the authors and the writers are carrying regarding the Caribbean islands? What are your views regarding that? Regarding the Caribbean islands, the adversities, the conditions that they are facing. As mentioned by Edward Brethwaite. Yes. Anybody? Okay, I think fine. No problem. Then we meet tomorrow, like you said. Yes, thank you so much, Gracie. Thank you so much.